We're going to now go to Lara Kendall, and she's a competitor in roller derby and now preparing a sex-based schools guidance handbook. Is going to tell us about Canadian schools guidance and welcome. And is also from Alberta. So welcome. Thank you so much, Lara, and over to you.
So I play roller derby, played for 9 years, and in the history of roller derby, apparently we've always been LGBT inclusive. But I didn't know that there was going to be transsexuals on the track until I played a tournament. So there was none on my original team. Roller derby was originally sex-based, hard sport, originally for women only. In my area, the women who started roller derby, mothers and lesbians, were supportive of LGBT individuals and also allowed men to coach and officiate the games. So then transsexuals came in very quickly, about 2014, and then they came in full force. With transsexuals and transvestites introducing themselves into roller derby, mothers and lesbians were forced to team up with them, no questions asked. Women became an umbrella term. In roller derby, there's certain kinds of groups, and there's democratic groups and not so democratic groups. I do transactional analysis, psychotherapy, that's sort of a group psychotherapy. And a combat group is a specific group where leaders are not questioned, orders are followed, and those who do not comply are ostracized until they comply or leave. Gender involves magical thinking, and because there is a junior co-ed program, this ideology is psychologically damaging to children. In women's roller derby, young boys who should have been sorted out eventually away from competing with women and eventually out to the men's league were actually allowed to play with women, as decided by the mother and coach. There's a few mothers and coaches of these boys in my league who were actually allowed to play with women, as decided by these women, no questions asked. And as these women began getting, our women, as the players began getting more severely hurt more often, women were silenced. Instead of listening to women who were getting hurt and quitting, coaches ignored these women and bragged about the accomplishments of their sons. One transvestite boy who was about 12 on our team, his mother was extremely vicious with me and bullied me online, calling me a TERF. Men and boys are taking spots away from women. That's in all sports now. It used to just be roller derby. Now it's all across Canada. And the coaches syrup over conflict. All debate is blocked. And I was cast out of the group for asking questions. I wrote a grievance, and I did quit recently. In my grievance to the league, I stressed a long list of important facts. A few of our women have their own problems, growing suicide rate for women. They don't need to be taking care of men. I was silenced by an inclusion policy, vilified and othered. Isn't it ironic, called TERF by the mother of the boy who dressed her son up as a girl. And she had done that since he was about the age of 3. The sexual offense rate of trans-identified men show perpetrator behavior. Men who are not confident will use female sports to barrel women over. This is actually a quote from a male player bragging about having barreled women over. This is perpetrator behavior. The forced use of pronouns, that's another element that's in their code of conduct. And this goes against the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Section 2, freedom of expression, written for individuals in the pursuit of truth and knowledge. These are important things. I chose to study transgender interventions and autism at the University of Calgary, while I officially studied group dynamics and child development, achieving a master's of educational research. My son is autistic, he's 14, and about a quarter of transgender labeled kids are autistic. This is very disconcerting to me. This is abuse, experimental abuse on special needs kids on the spectrum. My research looks at a case study of a Catholic girl, very similar to Jenny's story. I also looked at brain scan papers with Michelle Cretella, the CEO of the American College of Pediatricians, on the transgender brain. This is pseudoscience. We've looked at that. And she's going to be writing this guideline with me where we were going to debunk this kind of the suicide stats, the brain scans, the pseudoscience that it's very, very research biased. So I use my roller derby research as an investigation into authoritarian organizations. Roller derby is the microcosm, generally explaining the macrocosm of Canadian groupthink. This leads to the PowerPoint of the school guideline, ethically addressing gender confusion in schools. Okay, well, I started this school guideline with Michelle Cretella of the College of Pediatricians. She's always spoke out, and I met her in Hands Across the Aisle around 2016. And then I met Linda Blade a little later in the Alberta's Women's Declaration Division. And she really helped me with the sports element while I was in roller derby. I needed a lot of support. I also worked with Beth Stelzer and helped her with Save Women's Sports in the very early stages of that. I go into the psychological elements that are causing this groupthink. And from what I've boiled it down to is there's this codependence with teachers where they're really acting in unexplained phenomenological ways. They're telling kids that they can't be speciesists, they can't be homophobes. They're using a lot of shaming behavior on our children. And children are valuable, they're vulnerable, they're needy and dependent, they're immature, and they're imperfect. And teachers have this idea in their head that these children are their little friends and they don't understand boundaries. In transactional analysis, we use language that doesn't shame. We don't name call, we describe behavior. I read this book on codependence, I'm Dying to Take Care of You, written by nurses. And a lot of this behavior transfers to teachers, where teachers are hyperly taking care of everyone else, but not their own needs, their own self-care. I see a lot of heavy drinking in teachers right now. I have 3 school-age kids. I have a 14-year-old, I have a 12-year-old, and a 10-year-old. I see a lot of overeating in teachers. I don't see them looking after their own needs before they go and save the planet. And that is really an element of a psychological game. Children cannot discriminate between someone else's irresponsible behavior and their own behavior. So when a husband rages at his spouse, shame, anger, fear, and pain are induced in his listening children. When a baby is not held, shame and fear are induced. We're told, let the baby cry it out. That's not a good way to raise children. We need to hold our children close. Children cannot intellectually drop a boundary in place to protect themselves from the definitions of others. Part of the package that develops does not belong to them, but are projected on them by parental figures. This is where teachers come into play, and they're using words like homophobe, and children will not want to be straight in that atmosphere when they're shamed for just developing normally. Yes, we want to show that there are lesbian and gay parents, but the magical thinking that it takes to leap to someone is born in the wrong body, that is a double bind putting on children ideas that they can't step out of. And I'll get more into the double bind as we go along. An abused child learns to believe in nothing and hence goes to live out and experience the hopelessness of believing in nothing, a spiritual cynicism brought on by sarcasm, rage, shame, and fear-based parental figures. In my case study, the girl was very cynical. She was very cynical in a Catholic school about God. And I think that's not living congruently, but I think that the Catholic school has something to do with it being worse in the Catholic school because, as Jenny said, it's mandatory that there's a SOGI program. In other public schools, it's not mandatory. The children are expected to lead their own SOGI groups in Alberta, but in the Catholic system, it's just more intense. And then you also have the magical thinking. If you're religious and believe in God, that's fine, but the secular schools don't seem to be having is much a problem with the magical thinking. So this is where we get into the codependence, that the teachers are trying to take care of matters that they really don't have the skill or the understanding to do. And so I'm talking about the teachers being codependent. So let's say there's a teacher who saw that sort of no boundaries with, say, her mother, and instead of feeling valuable in that situation, she takes on her mother's feelings of not being valuable, and she'll have a lowest self-esteem. But she might also oscillate to feelings of grandiosity, and that's where teachers will tell children that they can have a space with them. They might be the only safe space this child will ever see. That's a feeling of grandiose that we need to look and educate teachers on. That this is what they're doing. There was a question of safe space, and my friend asked a teacher, if there was a 9-year-old girl who wanted to get pregnant, would you give her a safe space to do that? And the teacher said yes. And I thought, that's crazy. That needs a parent-teacher intervention. But teachers think that they're going to save the world. And the source of this is codependence, which is a disease that can be cured. So I'm going to be using some of these exercises in my school guideline to get the teachers to go through and understand themselves a little bit better. There's a codependence checklist. And the deeper issue is sending children to double bind. Now, a double bind message is two sets of ideas that are contradictory, and the child cannot fulfill these things, and none of the options are in the best interest of the child. To say a man is a woman, that's a double bind. That's a box that the child cannot get out of. In codependence, these are the messages that are much deeper, that parents or teachers, any parental figure that a child looks to love for, may say these things. And the most important one I want to think about, and I want you to think about, is Jazz Jennings. Grow up, don't grow up. Right? That's the most codependent family that we can really understand, because we're all watching that together. Okay, and then I'm going to go into some of the SOGI material. These things are not for kids. We have lesbians with lesbians that are transgender lesbians. That's just perpetrator behavior. We have this female body with the breasts removed and a rainbow vagina. That is a mockery of the human body. That's not okay. This is abuse on our children. Moonbags from the University of Calgary. You can't even say the name. You can't say female. You can't say woman. It's just for people to support bleeding bodies. And then we have sexual orientations that go into BDSM, attraction to people that share a need for consent and negotiated power exchange. This is not appropriate. And this needs to be pointed out. We're not going to put up with this. Now, groupthink is what's happening with these teachers. And it's not because they're bad people. In codependence, we see that these people are trying to be perfect. They're trying to please others. They're trying to try hard. They're trying to be strong. They got to hurry up. It's all got to happen. Like tomorrow, we have to be completely inclusive and diverse and have equity today. And this is not realistic thinking. This is program thinking. So then I go into the case study. And again, the arrogance of the school, they're discounting the mother's intelligence. They changed the girl's name without telling the mother. The mother was dealing with the palliative care of her own mother, who is dying and going through a divorce. And they say trans-identified kids, so many of them have lost a parent or a significant person close to them. This is trauma. And mom needed help at the time. So then I have Michelle Crutella as part of the school guideline, and she's going to debunk those studies because she comes from a really great place of authority, and she's been in this fight since the beginning. And she has a good sense of John Money's family history has to also be outlined, that John Money believed that men should be gilded like horses. Like, he really had a hate for himself. And that was brought on by his father beating his mother. And again, we see this as a result of early childhood trauma. All of transgender behavior and experimentation really comes from a hard place. So then I go into and I explain really to teachers and parents that there's different parenting styles. What Jazz's parents do is marshmallow parenting, and that's allowing the child to fail so that the parent can then take on a whole bunch of drama and a whole bunch of attention, because in childhood they learned that they needed this attention, that somehow they weren't getting it, and they would have to do these game playing, it's psychological games, bring people into their dramas. A drama triangle, we call it, where there's a persecutor, there's a victim, and there's a rescuer, a savior, and they play this constantly. Jazz's mom is constantly saving. She's constantly getting attention. She's the real star of the show. Now, what has to happen with teachers, they have to understand that they're not the friends of these kids, that there's ways to be negotiable. We don't want to be rigid, but we don't want to abandon children into magical thinking. So bullying is happening as a result of gender ideology, obviously. If pronouns are mandatory, we don't have freedom of speech. And I'm just putting in here as an exercise that I would get teachers to recognize how these messages are sent from a rigid viewpoint. Freedom of speech is degraded. I mean, that's rigid thinking. That's rigid parenting. That's not negotiating. That's not teaching a child democracy. And then we have double bind messages, right? Where teachers are gaslighting students. There's 69 genders. And a child yells, no, there's only 2, and he gets thrown out of class. And this has just happened in Alberta. My writing instructor told me this. Her kids were telling her this happened in her school, and she just can't believe how kids are being gaslighted and be expected to believe these things that can't possibly be true. A major thing that needs to be addressed in school guideline is online. Teachers are encouraging my kids to do online social media. And what happens in this online social media is bullying. There is no need for a teacher to be asking a child to get on their phone and do social media with the other kids. I don't know why it's happening, but it's happening. And I guess monkey see, monkey do. And this is, I think teachers have allowed boundaries to become so degraded that they just don't see the harm. They choose not to. Premeditated ignorance. But what's happening online is a lot of loneliness, a lot of public shaming, no adult safeguarding. Thoughtful youth are blocked and othered. We saw that it happens on Twitter. You'd think it's not going to happen to kids. Yes, it happens to kids. Loss of boundaries. Then we have the grooming, and children are being taught codependence by codependent parental figures. And this is, when we're leading to that, and boys are definitely outperforming girls at every age from what I've seen in roller derby, every time. And it's not allowed to be questioned. And not only that, but boys will have romantic interests and men will have romantic interests, and coaches have, and this has always been the bigger problem in sports, because what happens is women are being exploited. Men are there just to pick up the women. And when the relationship is over, the women leave, not the men. So again, women are pushed out of their own spaces. They're not allowed to feel safe. They can't be themselves, and they have to curtail to the men, because that's the groupthink. I mean, the men come first, no matter what. If a girl gets hurt on the track, a man comes barreling at her and he was unsafe, she gets the penalty. I've seen it. It's insane. So we see girls are going to get bullied, and it continues to happen. And when I talk to the team, I say, Daniel Smith is going to make it so girls can have their own space again. And they laugh at me and say, oh, that'll never happen. They're very, very sure of themselves that now that the gates have been opened, they can never go back. And I don't believe that. I believe that the boys can be separated from the girls again. Again, that discounting parents as uneducated and tyrannical, that's interesting. I believe that that's really projecting their own stuff on parents. So here's some resources I'll have for the guideline. People need to go to 12-step groups and look at themselves and look at their family of origin. And there's a lot of addiction going on, including online addiction, right? Sex addiction. Sex addiction is where parents are fighting teachers with no boundaries as far as sex and children go. We've always known that there's been that problem, that teachers will have sex with their students given the opportunity. I've seen it. We've all seen it. It's always happened. Now we are at the perfect storm, like Jenny said, and there is no way anyone is going to talk about it if it's happening. Even if it has nothing to do with gender ideology, everyone has been silenced. Not all teachers, okay. I'm talking about male teachers who have gotten into that position specifically to be predators. So then I use the ideas of child development under TA, and that's pretty involved, so I won't get too far into it, but it gets into some why unexplained behaviors happen. And that's basically TA. It's like the id, the ego, and the super ego, but it's in ways that we can understand and explain it to anyone, including children. And I'm just going to leave it there then.